Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Talking Success. We've been on an incredible journey over this series, over this year since we launched on YouTube. We hit a milestone last week, which was 50,000 downloads on YouTube, which quite honestly just blew me away. So a big thank you to everyone who listens and who tunes in. A big thank you to our guests as well. And let's move on to our guests for this afternoon, or this morning, I should say. Joining us live from Joburg, not too far away from where I'm sitting, is Chipo Mushwana. And I know that pronunciation is correct because I asked it before we started recording. So, Chipo, it's amazing to have you on. Thank you so very, very much. Chipo works for Nedbank, who probably needs no introduction, but if you are tuning in from overseas and you haven't heard of Nedbank, they're quite a big bank in South Africa. Chipo runs the emerging innovation and payment side of Nedbank, and I had the pleasure of hearing Chipo speak a couple of times at various conferences over the years, and she has the most sort of charismatic way of discussing what is, to me anyway, a very interesting sector, but perhaps to sort of people tuning in that don't know much about sort of banking innovation and payments, how can payments be sort of fun and enthralling? Believe me, stay tuned and you'll find out exactly why and how. Chipo, thank you so very, very much. I know you're in the office today, so thanks for making time to speak to us. I've given a bit of an intro, but clearly there's a load more. So over to you, Mike's yours.
All right, cool. So good morning to everybody. And I'm really excited to spend sort of the next 45 minutes to an hour with you and sharing some insights, nuggets, lesson learns, and thoughts and perceptions about the world around us, especially as it relates to financial services, financial inclusion, what's happening in the payments world, what we're seeing broadly across the continent. So Darren, thanks for having me.
Pleasure.
And I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, let's start with you, if I can. So you've been with the bank for around about 8 years, if I'm not mistaken. Done a couple.
5 years now.
5 years.
5 years now.
I can't count then. 5 years. That's fine. What's a few years between friends? But so 5 years at the bank, and you work in this area called sort of innovation and payments, which to me sounds super cool and super exciting. But I'm a nerd. What does it actually mean, and what do you do?
So every day I wake up and obsess about how to future-proof the business. What does that mean? It means how do we collaborate effectively with non-banking partners? How do we find different distribution channels for our products and services? How do we define new business models? And how do we design new products and solutions that we can take into the market, not only to defend in areas where we are strong, but also to lift our profile in instances where we are underweight. So that's effectively what I do on a day-to-day basis.
Wow. Okay. So that's quite a broad job. Okay. And there's also obviously lots of moving parts within a bank, especially a bank at the size of Nedbank, the history of Nedbank. If you were to sort of pinpoint a couple of the programs or projects you've been running over the last couple of years, or maybe if you're allowed to disclose what you're working on at the moment, obviously if it's confidential, then please don't. What sort of innovations has your department been responsible for, maybe that people would know in South Africa? Maybe they've seen some of the products and services that have been launched.
Yeah, sure. I've got a couple of those. I won't tell you what we are working on because that's absolutely hush at the moment. Okay. But I'll tell you some of the stuff that we've taken into the market that you probably see in press releases and stuff. Yeah. So we launched the first soft POS solution on the African continent. And what that is the ability to convert your Android phone into a point of sale machine. Apple only launched that this year because obviously they didn't allow anyone to access their NFC capability, but we did a first in Africa for that. And Nedbank joined a cohort of 8 other global banks running a global pilot when we came into the market. And fast forward 3 years later, so many lessons learned. And I believe that soft POS is not going to be an innovation per se, but it's going to be part of the norm. It's going to be day to day eventually, because the cost of point of sale machines is really expensive. And that was motivated really by our ethos around money experts who do good. How do we support startups? How do we support micro enterprises to be able to accept digital payments? And in a country like South Africa, where cash is typically king, this journey around low cost payment acceptance capabilities has been one that we've been on and we continue to obsess about. Some of the other stuff was the first WhatsApp payment solution again on the continent. Now you've got a couple of them from our competitors. But Nedbank, again, through my team, we were first to launch that. And what we did was through the WhatsApp channel, you were able to create an invoice, send it, effectively pay and get paid. And that was a solution again around low cost payment acceptance for small micro enterprises and some medium sized as well. And then some of the other stuff that we've worked on along with some of our colleagues in the bank is the super app like Avo. We're currently running all the open banking embedded finance initiatives for the organization. So Nedbank again was first to market with an API marketplace, and that was us signaling to the rest of the world that we're open for business, but also we understand the competitive landscape around us, and we want to be able to do that in a controlled, regulated, but also scalable and sustainable way. So we're currently doing that, and we've got a couple of APIs that are currently on board. And obviously, PayShop. So I've been excited to lead that initiative for the organization as well around launching PayShop, which went live in March this year, but effectively motivating for it internally, externally, at an industry level as well, and how we actually digitize cash in South Africa and drive socio-economic development. So that's just some of the stuff. There's a lot more, but I think that's stuff that you would find easily.
So typically what I would have done is I would have pressed you really hard on soft pos, right? But I think anyone that's been sort of tuning in to my episodes are probably sick and tired of me talking about soft pos, and that's that's with all due respect. I had the chaps from Icoca on a couple of weeks ago, and prior to that, I was talking to Mastercard and talking about soft pos. I was a massive fan of it. Oh, I still am a massive fan of it. I think it can displace, traditional point of sale systems. And actually, when the guys from Icoca came on, it was really interesting. It gave me a whole different view on. There is a place in the market or a certain segment of the market where soft pos is absolutely viable. But there's other parts of the market, certainly when you look at large retailers, multi sort of tenant SMEs, where actually soft pos is maybe not the right solution because you'd have to give everyone their own devices and the security, but I won't harp on about that. But if anyone's interested in learning about my views on soft pos, then have a listen to my episode with Matt Putman from Icoca. But I do want to explore this world of open banking with you, because obviously in Europe, open banking, there's regulations around it. It's it is very open. You're able to do lots of different things. There's huge amounts of innovation that's happened in open banking. When we look at the South African sort of model or view on open banking, there isn't regulation necessarily, correct me if I'm wrong, please, there isn't necessarily a regulation around that as it stands at the moment. Where do you see that moving to? What needs to happen in order for open banking to become mainstream, and then for things like embedded finance to sort of appear everywhere? And I know we're starting to see it on sort of e-com and what have you, but there's obviously a long, long way to go.
So there are a couple of things, and I'll start with sort of a comparison in terms of what we've seen happening globally. And obviously, the UK is leading in terms of open banking, open finance, etc. And there's a couple of initiatives on the continent as well, and South Africa being one of them. But one of the things that you've rightfully mentioned and touched on is the need for regulation. So regulation levels the playing field. Regulation puts guardrails on how we need to behave. And because of how vast and yet complex the open banking world and now embedded finance world is, it can't be left to be regulated individually by participants. So We've got big questions right now in South Africa around data consent frameworks, around sharing of liability. And all those are critical issues that are imperative for us to drive open banking, open finance. And unfortunately, in South Africa, we don't have a situation where banks and non-banks have a history of working together and defining things that are new in the industry. We've done that in pockets, and we are starting to do that through some industry-led initiatives, but we're just not as mature as the other EU markets that we see. So in the absence of that, I think it's difficult to scale open banking and open finance, and some of that stuff needs to be brought in so that we can sort of scale it and we can begin to define use cases around it, because it's not a question of us not knowing what to do with it. It's just questions around, okay, who's going to do the reporting? If Darren loses money today, who is he going to call to get a refund or to log a dispute? And what is that dispute framework? What is that chargeback framework, etc.? We don't have all those things. We have them in silos as businesses across different products, but open banking is about scale. Open banking is about different parties in the value chain. And until we're able to have that clearly defined, I think we're a long way away from open banking, open finance. And I've been fortunate to be involved in a couple of conversations as well globally around open banking, open finance, and most recently in the US. And one of the big questions was, has embedded finance delivered on the promise? And there were mixed reviews in the room. We had regulators, we had big techs, we had banks, and we had fintechs. And when I walked out of that, in my mind, I said probably the guys that have won the most are the big tech companies, such as Apple. I think Apple has built a bank without a banking license and done it through partnerships and effectively leveraged principles of open finance and banking as a service to be able to build out an entire universe and a business altogether. But if you look at the other players, the benefits have been pedestrian, have been nominal, and that's really a function of probably the macro environment in which either banks are in, maybe technology and capacity constraints in fintechs and smaller organizations, etc. So that's really just my view on open banking, open finance. I do believe there's something there. I do believe that it's a means and a way to deliver delightful client experiences to anybody. But until everybody understands what it means for my data to be open and available to everybody, if I consent a telco to have my data, a retailer to have my data, a bank to have my data, even 12 months down the line, do I have sight and visibility of that? We don't have some of those building blocks in place. And if I think about the South African context, questions around digital ID, in that enable open banking, open finance, we don't have that fully in place just yet. So in the absence of those building blocks and foundational elements, we still have a bit of work to do. And you find that typically financial services institutions do a lot of the hard work. And if I'm sitting in a room around priority, you can imagine how that easily goes
Sure.
in that scenario.
Because, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I think if you walked up to 10 people in the street here in Joburg or Cape Town, wherever it may be, and said, what's open banking? They'd probably look at you like you were mad and go, open banking? Like, hang on a minute, my bank should be closed, right? This is what I trust. I don't want that. I just think it's a terrible, terrible name for what should be something else. It's right? I mean, genuinely speaking, you ask a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old to go and draw a picture of a bank. It might be different now, but when I was that age, I draw, a safe, and I draw lots of, it was a safe store of value. Now we're going, hey, it's open banking, like literally come in. I think there needs to be a lot of education around that, and perhaps actually the consumer may not even need to know that it's open banking.
They don't.
I
They
was talking to a
absolutely.
remittance company last week in Joburg, and the way they remit funds is through crypto. But they're like, listen, we're not a crypto company. That's just a technology we use. Our
Yeah.
consumers and our customers don't need to know about that because they're not
Yeah.
trading crypto. There's no risk. There's no volatility in the market. We're not FTX and we're not Binance. That's just the rails we use. So perhaps from a consumer perspective, there doesn't need to be this awareness around open banking. But from a sort of an industry perspective, it's obviously something that we've been talking about for quite a few years, in various conferences and workshops and what have you. I certainly see the benefit, probably more so on embedded finance, and really what that can do to hopefully, and you touched on sort of the SME and the micro SME side, which I'd like to talk about as well. There's an element of financially including people who have SMEs
Mhm.
or micro SMEs to enable them to have access to financial products that typically they either didn't have access to or didn't know where to find access to. So bringing all of that into this sort of super app world makes a lot of sense. Before we go back to the micro SMEs and the SMEs, innovation when it comes to enterprise customers, enterprise merchants, enterprise customers of Nedbank. Is there much innovation that goes on that side as well, or is that less so because there isn't necessarily the sort of the touch points and the UX and the UI that you would think about when you're dealing with consumers, individuals, or micro stroke sort of SMEs?
So there is a form of innovation, and it's more around probably digitizing previously manual processes,
Okay.
making access to tools that make my life as an enterprise much easier, from a financial services perspective. And I think in that space, it's really more of a data play. And I say data in the sense that if I'm running a sizable enterprise, I want actionable data to be able to make informed decisions about my business, about managing cash flow, managing liquidity, about am I collecting what is owed to me? Am I paying out in time? Am I minimizing penalties, etc.? So that has really been the focus for us when we talk about innovation in that space.
Mm.
And also, we find that with the larger enterprises, some of the solutions are actually quite bespoke. So you talk about let me bring something, for example, we have a sizable enterprise in the insurance space that came to us and said, listen, we've got a problem with debit check authentication. And it's been a problem in the industry for years now. We've had TT1, TT through TT3 now, etc. And what we then did as a team is we took soft pause
Mhm.
and we've combined it with TT3 and effectively are allowing this insurance company to enable its agents to do debit order authentication in real time, in field, on the spot.
Oh, wow.
So, and that's a very bespoke and nuanced solution that we created based on what the enterprise said to us. And after speaking to a couple of other large insurance companies that we obviously bank from a Nedbank perspective, there is significant appetite for it. And we've recently gone live into the market just a month ago with it. So that's just an example of taking old and new and effectively providing a solution in the market to solve for a pain point.
Yeah.
Maybe when I come back, we'll be able to give you results on that. But it's one
Yeah.
of the things I'm really excited about because innovation is not about stuff that's too far-fetched. It's really sometimes about solving immediate needs using the relevant tools that are at our disposal.
Well, I'm going to ask you to get your crystal ball out a little bit later. So I'm going to ask you to look into the future. But before we do, now, obviously, solutions for large scale enterprises and solutions for micro or SMEs are different. Okay, different needs, different requirements, liquidity, treasury, lending, etc., etc. But there are some similarities, especially when we look at the future of banking. And you mentioned data or data. Sorry for my South African friends, data. When or to empower an SME or a micro merchant to make more informed decisions about their business, Data is a key aspect of that. But I think if you deliver data the same way that you deliver data to an enterprise, right, a large enterprise where they've got teams of reporting analysts and what have you, looking at sort of various different graphs and putting it into Power BI and all this kind of stuff. It's very different to when you're looking at someone who's got a mom and pop shop or runs a spaza store or I don't know, trades at a market. And I know there's been a lot of innovation around how do you give enough data for these business owners, entrepreneurs to make informed decisions without overwhelming them. What does Nedbank do in that instance? Do you do that yourselves? Is that something you're looking at, maybe bringing in a fintech partner to try and help along the way, or what's your view there?
So, and this is, I'm assuming you're asking from an SME perspective.
I am, yeah.
So, yeah. So from an SME perspective, we actually do have a product that's been in market for years now, even before my time at Nedbank. So I cannot even claim sort of kudos for that. But effectively what this product does is it gives SMEs, again, actionable data on a day-to-day basis. So I've got a mom and pop store on Rivonia Road in Sandton. The data that we give this SME is how many other mom and pop stores are on that same street within that vicinity. If we're banking them, we're able to provide sort of anonymized data insights to say you are relatively doing well or you're not doing well in relation to your peers, but also what is happening at a macro level in terms of that industry as a whole. So am I selling clothes? Am I a dentist? Etc. So we've been able to package that information in real time, literally through a very simple interface for the SME, and it's up to them to decide how to use that information. And then obviously we do have bankers that are on call. Yep. So within Nedbank, we also just won SME Bank of the Year, Accenture Chorus, etc. And that was because we actually make sure that from an SME perspective, and we've been doing this over years and probably refined it, we have got bankers and individuals that are able to sit and explain that data to an SME. So there's one thing to have access to the data, and there's another thing to know what to do with it. So we're constantly iterating around that, making sure that it makes sense and it's relevant. So rightfully so, the data is different. And it's a function of time and capacity for an SME as opposed to a large enterprise that probably has got a few data analysts sitting somewhere and teams that are crunching the numbers and then spooling out reports and strategies as well.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, let's look at another aspect of banking, and you did mention this, which is cash. Okay, cash and branches. So we kind of spoken a bit about the digital products that you and your team are creating and taking to market. And is this driven by the need to digitally transform as a bank, or the need to try and displace cash from the economy and to make it more digital? Or is there another reason? And what are you guys doing as a bank in terms of your strategy for branches and for cash?
Cool. All right. So it's probably a combination of both. And I say a combination of both because when I think about South Africa and I think about even the African continent as a whole, we are not in a position where we have the luxury of completely displacing cash. Why? Because the payment value chain is not mature enough to allow us to decash the whole economy and have people using digital tools only. The net result of that is that we would probably increase financial exclusion rather than include it. So there are many debates around the benefits of digitizing cash, like, oh, tax benefits and getting rid of the shadow economy, etc. And they're all good and well. But in our context, take South Africa, for example. Can you spend a week in a rural community in South Africa without cash today? You cannot. No. You actually cannot, right? Mm-hmm. And that's because we don't have digital acceptance mechanisms in those environments for us to be able to do that. So as a bank, are we driving digitization of cash? Yes. And that's why we did things like PaySharp, and that's why we do low cost payment acceptance, because we understand it's a journey. It's a North Star for the whole economy, because cash is expensive to handle. There's security issues around it. We all know the story behind that. But we also have to be cognizant of the environment that we find ourselves in. The second part of your question, what are we doing with branches, etc.? We haven't downscaled our branches.
Okay.
So I'll give you an interesting insight. What we are actually seeing is that, and I'm going to say the smaller banks that don't have a branch presence actually are coming to us, and I'm sure other banks, to leverage our branch, or rather even ATM network. So I've sat with some of those requests to say, okay, so you want to leverage our ATM capabilities to do X, etc. Because we still in a world where people understand digital financial capabilities and services, but are not consuming them at the speed and rather at the level at which they should be consuming them. I always say when something goes wrong with money, you want to call somebody or you want to walk into a physical building. And in my career, I was part of one of the presidential campaigns in South Africa, and we did access to finance and access to markets for small, medium enterprises. And we had taken the Muhammad Yunus self-help group model in India and effectively brought it into a program in South Africa, and we were running it and we were rolling out across sub-Saharan Africa. And I remember one of the things we did in rural communities, like really remote, was we would give these groups of ladies cash boxes that had a key for them to effectively save their money, etc. And it was great as a savings mechanism, particularly for consolidating savings, which is probably what a stokvel account is now.
Yep.
But it was limited in that that's all you could do. In that if the cash box is full, it's full. They have to wait for a Chipo to bring it again. So there are just some of those things we really have to be cognizant about. And people, when something, so groups would lose money or something would go wrong, whatever, and they have no recourse because they write in a book and they're a group of them and they have to hold each other accountable. But once you've got a bank that's helping you, you can all catch a taxi, a bus, or drive in a car and go to a bank branch and say, what happened to my money? How can I recover it? What do I do? And that gives you a level of comfort as a human being and is part of the experience. So I think that those are things that we've seen happening in the industry. And a lot of people went to say, no, you don't need branches and all that stuff. But I think I'm quickly sort of rolling back on those assumptions to say you do need some branches.
Very interesting. Obviously, no names, but these
Yes.
smaller banks who are looking at partnering with Nedbank or other banks to utilize this sort of the ATM network, is that really for cash deposits then for merchants or for consumers? So
Yeah, both.
channel
So it's cash deposits, it's cash out,
right.
and some of that stuff is available if you're multi-banked. You just have to pay the fee, etc. But they would want a bespoke button on the ATM that says Bank X here, and you can do the following.
Wow.
And we've had numerous discussions internally, like, listen, we've already invested in the asset, we can easily sweat it. And then you obviously have some strategic questions around how far do you want to enable the competitor
Yeah, of course.
in that instance, but also balance the need for financial inclusion, etc. So there's a couple of things that we do, and from a Nedbank perspective, we also do have mobile ATMs that we send out to very remote areas
Yeah.
where financial services are needed. Beginning of this year, I remember I had to take a mobile ATM up a mountain to service 1 million people over a month. And these people typically congregate for every year. So I'm going to do it again in January. But it was such an interesting experience because simple things like how do you get the ATM up a mountain? There's no electricity. There's no ablution services. There's so many things that you take for granted. But when we finally overcame those hurdles, it was such a beautiful thing to see because people needed the cash. And they needed to transact even in that environment. And we were shocked at the levels, or rather the volumes that went through or that particular ATM. And we still do it now, but it was just astounding because we didn't have that data point from a Nedbank perspective. That ATM, I remember, did much better than an ATM in Sandton over a month's period in terms of withdrawals. And that shocked everybody to say, okay, so there's real money that's flowing in this economy, in this mountain where people congregate for a very special and specific reason. And as a bank, we would have never thought about going there. But now that we are seeing something that's totally different.
Wow, that's an amazing story. When you said that, you said, would you have thought that the ATM up the mountain would have actually dispensed more cash than the ATM in Sandton? Actually, as a kind of a fintech nerd, I kind of went, yeah, I get that, because I don't think I've ever withdrawn cash in Sandton or in Joburg, quite frankly. I mean, I just walk around with my watch or my phone, and that's just the way I transact. But I would. Yeah, I get that. You're living in a remote place, and there isn't, as you said, there isn't.
You don't need it, right?
Well, there isn't.
You don't need it.
I don't need it personally, but other people, I get your point. Other people absolutely would. But I think Sandton, in terms of the demographics within Sandton, anyway. Okay, so branches are still very important to the bank, as is cash. But I think if we do wind the clock forward maybe 10 or 15 years, and we look at the generations that are starting to come through, and, from sort of my generation and younger, we've grown up, we're digitally native. Okay. And I think you'll find in 10 or 15 years' time, actually, the boards that are sitting in the big banks are going to be digitally native people as well, right? Probably gone are the guys in the grey pinstripe suits and receding hairlines, smoking cigars. Not to be stereotypical here or anything, but they are going to be replaced with people that are digitally native. With that in mind, and we look at the future of banking, the future of finance, I think undoubtedly there will be a move towards cashless economies. Now, some economies are going to take longer than others. We've discussed that. In order to get to that point, though, there needs to be another element to financial inclusion, which my colleague Danielle wrote about a couple of weeks ago, and that's the financial literacy side. Okay, and explaining to the younger generation that actually it is safer to put your money in a bank than to put it under your pillow, right, or under your mattress. It is smarter to invest in a money market or in a high interest bearing in a bank account, so you can earn money, you can keep up with inflation. What does what's Nedbank view on that? What is the bank doing in terms of, yes, financial inclusion, but financial literacy? Is there any programs that are being run or initiatives that are being run?
Of course. So Nedbank is really quite strong from a financial literacy perspective, across the board. So we do a lot of initiatives in marginalized or low penetrated communities.
Yep.
Either through local radio stations, through our corporate social responsibility. We also do have a strong research or an insights that informs where and how we drive financial literacy. And recently, we also sort of produced a report around the state of South Africans as it relates to financial health. And in that report was also unpacking how much people understand about their finances. And I guess it touches on what you're saying, to say it's okay to put your money in a bank.
Yeah.
But also, my experience says to me that financial literacy, we probably have to be quite specific. So I've found that financial literacy is not really the issue.
Okay.
The issue is, are our products consumable for that particular audience? So Go into a remote area today, go into the townships. I always say, if someone can use WhatsApp, if someone can use TikTok, if someone, without a manual, without being taught how to do it, then they're able to open a digital bank account and navigate and understand what it is.
Sure.
So as a banker right now, I'm asking myself the question, are our products that intuitive? Are our products that seamless? Are our products that easy to consume? Or we are using the financial literacy brand to justify maybe our inability over the years to provide crisp, clear, and simple products that people actually need. And that for me is a big question I always bring into the room, because I say I'm not doof, and I don't believe the next person is doof. But if I see someone holding a phone and doing something, my assumption is that there's a fair level of literacy and digital competence. And if we're truly digital, and if we are mobile first, then where is the issue? And when you begin to unpack it, it's pieces around legacy systems, legacy requirements that make it difficult for the person to engage with the product, not that they don't understand what the benefits are. So this is me putting my South African hat on and putting my banker hat on, and there's a conflict, obviously, but it's one that we need to stay down, and one that we need to be realistic about, if we're going to drive socioeconomic development in this country.
So I 100% agree with everything you've just said. However, I challenge you on one thing, and that's the UI and the UX, so the user experience, the user interface. If it's intuitive, 100% you will be able to onboard consumers, you'll be able to get them to open up bank accounts, etc., etc. I think where the challenge is, personally, and please, I'm happy to debate this with you, maybe not now, maybe in the future, is actually when it comes to some of the financial products that people sign up for,
Yeah.
but they're not aware of what.
Yeah.
They're not not aware. They're not. Yeah, okay. They're not aware of what they're signing up to. Okay, so I would imagine, using your case study, people that are opening TikTok, or signing up for TikTok or WhatsApp or Facebook or any of the other big platforms that we know about, I would put my last brand on the fact that not one single person has ever read those terms and conditions that you sign up and you press agree to. Okay, or if they have, they definitely haven't understood, every single line and clause in that contract. Okay, I've got friends that are lawyers, and they don't even do this. Okay, so I think the challenge around financial literacy isn't necessarily just about being able to access digital services. It's about being able to understand sometimes what are the implications of me taking this micro loan or this small loan. What does that actually mean for me? If I'm going to apply for a loan and there is a credit search done, what does that mean? So a credit search done, okay, and I'm going to do it 10 or 20 times to find the best rate. Actually, I've now just had a negative effect on my credit score, and I wasn't aware of that. So I think there is still a literacy angle. Maybe not it's, how do I open a phone and how do I download an app, or how do I navigate the app? But the products and services that are embedded within those apps, do I know actually what I'm getting myself in for?
You're absolutely right. And I think about, like you're saying, complex journeys or complex products like credit, like investing, that require a bit more focus and attention. I don't think a lot of us read terms and conditions. And it reminds me, I was at a township economy workshop, and obviously Nedbank does this in terms of supporting small enterprises. And one guy stood up and asked me a question and said, I took money from Nedbank and now they're harassing me for me to pay it back. And I said to him, yes, if you take money from a bank, you have to pay it back. It's never free money. And he says, but I don't have money, and Nedbank knows I don't have money because there's never any money in my account. And I said, that's besides the point. When we borrow you money, we've built it into our financial models that you should pay back with interest. And it became an education point around sources of funding for small businesses, because it's, if you're going to take from a bank, terms and conditions apply. If you're going to take from an angel investor, it's different. If you're going to take from a VC, it's different. If you're going to take from a government loan, it's different. And you're so right, when it becomes that complex and understanding the implications of what each of these different systems or requirements are, no doubt. People need to be educated. People need to take the time to unpack and understand what it actually means at a personal level, and also at a business level.
So, and I think we're both sort of on the same sort of viewpoint here. Maybe the financial literacy wasn't the right question. Maybe this, or the right phrase. Maybe it is financial education. So maybe we have financial inclusion, financial education, and financial literacy. I think maybe
Yeah,
that all three need to work in tandem, really, to drive
they do.
inclusion within the sector. Awesome. Now we've got a couple of minutes left, and I'm going to leave my favourite question to the end. Okay. Now I'm going to preface this with anyone that's listening to this probably has heard a podcast that we recently released with Mr. Brett King, who probably needs no introduction, and he was talking about the future of banks. Okay, and he was looking at in the year 2050. Okay, so I'm going to ask Chipo exactly the same question. Okay, what is Nedbank going to look like in the year 2050? I appreciate this is your view, not the view of the bank. Your opinion. Maybe not even Nedbank, okay, but banking in South Africa. You look at the main banks. What are they going to look like in 2050?
Geez, I'm desperately dusting off my sort of crystal ball here. But if I were to give it a shot, so there's a couple of technologies I'd put my bet on.
Okay.
The first one is the metaverse. So I'm a firm believer in Second Life and that digital life, and our kids are already in it, right? So I'm a firm believer that a lot of the financial services interactions, education, content, and stuff will be driven through that. And that's also because the generation that is coming up is not as asset and material heavy like we are. I think they'll be minimalists, and they'll probably going to place a lot of value on digital tokens and digital assets, more than stuff they can touch and feel, because that's where they're going to spend a lot of their time. The second thing that obviously it's topical around artificial intelligence, and I'm sure maybe you've also heard the podcast by Elon Musk, and he was being interviewed by the British Prime Minister, but they were talking about AI in the context of human beings and what that actually means. So if I think about what AI is going to do in financial services, we probably are going to have less human beings. There might not be a Chipo talking in a podcast and sort of trying to predict the future. That will be predicted and readily available to everybody.
It'll be your avatar.
I also do think
it'll be your avatar in the metaverse. Actually, that's what it will be.
exactly. I probably will be an avatar in the metaverse. I probably will be crunching large volumes of data and spooling them out in some fancy, I don't know, diagram or whatever the case may be. But also, I think that traditional bank accounts will probably be replaced by tokenized versions again. And that, like I said, is tied to identity forms. And that will be applicable to both humans and machines. Because I think by then we'll have a duality in our world, and we'll have to sort of cater for both. I generally think that issues around, or other topics around crypto, etc., I'm yet to see a proper use case for crypto. If I just look at what's happened, I think there are probably going to be very specific use cases within very specific industries doing very specific things, but I don't think it's a fit for all, one size fits all kind of technology and capability. So if I think about banking, then that is what I see. And again, less branches, and more of the tokenized stuff will be the norm, as opposed to be, a select few.
Awesome. Well, I was going to ask you about CBDCs. I was going to ask you about cross-border payments when it comes to cryptocurrencies. I've got a million other questions for you. I can speak to you all day, but I'm very mindful of your time and respectful of your time. Chipo, thank you so much. Now, just to finish off, let's just give mention to some of the work that Nedbank does with fintechs. A lot of our audience are fintechs at various different stages, whether it's ideation stage, whether they're looking at MVPs, whether they're in market and they're gaining traction, or whether they're more advanced. Does Nedbank work with fintechs, or are you trying to build sort of an ecosystem yourself, internally with customer-facing applications? Where does Nedbank stand on that?
So, hand on heart, I can say this to you: Nedbank is the best partner for fintechs.
Amazing.
And I say this having been in the fintech world before, and now being in the Nedbank world, and in the fintech world having had exposure to all the other banks. I can tell you, and we always used to make a joke to say, if some people checked the backyards of some of the banks, there's a whole graveyard with fintech ideas and relationships that have gone absolutely sour. And that for me was why I joined Nedbank. I joined Nedbank because a lot of the fintechs that I have come across and continue to come across have got their first corporate deal from Nedbank. Nedbank is not afraid to partner. And I think that's been the ethos of Nedbank over the years. And you can ask a couple of them. I can give you some offline, but they'll happily tell you Nedbank was our first corporate and probably still is partner. So we do partner quite a lot. The work that I do is about outside in view. And constantly keeping that front and center for the bank, but also curating those conversations, because you need someone who understands the best of both worlds and is able to curate the conversations and make sure that they are mutually beneficial, and also that they drive the outcomes that are required on both sides. Because you've got a Nedbank that's got 35,000 people, and then you've got a fintech of 5 to 10 people. They don't have the time for endless workshops, indefinitely, contracts that take forever and a day, legal opinions, etc. So you need to be able to also manage those conversations, and we do that as Nedbank. Our ecosystems are built on partnerships and collaboration. That is all we know how to do. In our acquiring business, for example, we are probably going to process R500 billion end of this year, and we are doing that through partnerships. If you look at how we're doing that, it's effectively through partnerships. So we're very, very big on that. And we hope that we maintain the good reputation that we have out there in the market.
And if there's anyone listening to this who is keen to explore partnerships with Nedbank, best to sort of look you up on LinkedIn, maybe drop you a message on LinkedIn, or is there a separate partnerships team, or are you happy to take those sort of inquiries?
Yeah, it comes to my desk all the time. Right. All the fintech investments, all the partnerships, all the collaborations effectively end up on my desk. So you can ping me on LinkedIn. You could be chatting to somebody in the bank and maybe you just need a nudge or you need guidance and direction. I had one of our point of sale, I won't say which fintech, called me yesterday. And they said, listen, we've been chatting to some people in Nedbank. We just need a nudge and we need to understand who's who. And because they're mates of mine, I gave them a call. I'm like, okay, this is the person you should be talking to. This is how you're going to get the deal closed. If there's any problem, let me know. So that's effectively the role that we play. And I do understand that space very well.
Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here first. It's not what you know, it's who you know, right? We'll leave it on that very positive note. Chipo, thank you so very much. Honestly, I could go on for hours, but I'd love to get you back in the new year, find out how sort of results have been and some of the innovations that you're working on now that hopefully you've taken to market by then. And, talking all things kind of the future of finance, the future of banking, and the future of South Africa. But in the meantime, thank you so much. If we don't speak before, have a very happy new year, and see you on the other side.
See you on the other side, and I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I broke free from the meetings. Now I'm going back to standard practices and procedures. But thank you so much, Darren and team. I really, really enjoy this.
Our absolute pleasure. Speak to you again soon.
Cool. Alrighty.